The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar, VR and PR, why virtual reality is set to be the latest tool for content and comms. My name is Philip Smith. I'm the head of news and content at Gorkana, and I'm delighted to be your host and moderator today. To be honest, it's not a hard introduction to this webinar for me to write. I knew what I was going to say anyway, and then after the events of last week, in a week when Barack Obama appeared to make as many headlines for wearing a VR headset as he did for urging the UK to stay in the European Union, I think it's safe to say VR is in the news. But of course, it's not just politicians looking for a good photo opportunity that's driving VR. Media companies from Sky Sports to the Huffington Post are exploring how to produce VR content in different ways. Earlier this year, Facebook's plans for the consumer launch of its headset, Oculus Rift, and the excited media reaction to this year's Mobile World Congress, where VR dominated, prompted a lot of industry experts to predict big things for virtual reality. So far, so good. But today, in this webinar, we want to look at what the emergence of VR means for media and PR and comms professionals, and why they should be taking it seriously as a media channel. VR may promise to be an exciting new content platform, an opportunity for brands and media businesses, but is it too early to evaluate its potential and its strength as a communications channel? I'm delighted to say that I've got two people with me who are confident that it's not too early and going to give us some reasons why. So we're going to talk about why the time is right for VR and why people are excited about its potential as a storytelling opportunity for brands. And in a minute, I will introduce our two experts, and they will take us a tour. Each of them will present for about 15 minutes each through VR and virtual reality and the opportunities and challenges it presents. They're going to present a series of slides, but I'm really interested, and we're all really interested, in hearing your questions and your thoughts as well. So do take the opportunity to think of your questions for our two experts, and we will make sure that we leave some time at the end of the two presentations to get those answered. Now, as I said, I'm delighted to be joined by the two experts, and I'm going to introduce them properly now. They are Nick Morey, Nick Morey is Dynamo PR's Senior Creative Manager and also head of its virtual reality division. He's working on clients such as NVIDIA, NVIDIA even, yeah. And that's why he's working with them. His background lies predominantly in consumer tech, mobile app and video games PR, and his previous clients include Panasonic, Sega and Line. Nick joined Dynamo PR as a freelancer in 2014, and actually intriguingly gave up a career in tattooing to do so, I believe.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
But he said he was hugely impressed with the creativity and ingenuity of the company and became a permanent member shortly afterwards. So Nick, delighted to welcome you to the webinar.
Thank you.
We're also joined, I'm delighted to say, by Matt Glass. And Matt is director at The Cult, but also co-founder of Cultural Reality Co. He's a former writer, he's a former journalist, he's worked on the People newspaper, he's also worked on Closer, More, Best, Shortlist, Love It and First. I believe mostly as a freelancer, is that right?
Yes, yeah.
And he also spent a long time writing on the Daily Star. That is where he tells me he met Charlie Morgan. The two were working together, and also, he says, began to dream up ways in which they could conquer the world. They quickly reached a mutual decision that their unbeatable contacts, those are his words, within the media industry and their creative approach to press campaigns would be a far better route to the top than any form of animal, brass band, watermelon kicking sideshow. So they launched The Cult PR. Matt is also going to tell us, though, why he's decided to found Cultural Reality Co., which is his virtual reality business. Now, we're going to hear from Nick first, and he's going to present to us about his views, and then we'll hand over to Matt. But before we do that, I do want to remind you all to think of your questions and send in your questions, because we'd really like to hear your thoughts and get some of the things that you want answered. So please help me put Nick and Matt on the spot when they finish their presentations. That is more than enough from me, though. So let me hand over to Nick. Nick, please, take it away.
Great, thank you. Right, so I'll just dive straight in. VR is something that we've been quite interested in for quite a long time at Dynamo. I mean, we recognised its potential early on, and we actually have an opportunity given to us from our crowdfunding experience. We worked on FOVE, which is the first eye-tracking software headset, and that raised nearly 500,000 on Kickstarter, and we saw that there was an audience for it. So we actually moved on to doing work with NVIDIA, where we did a nice creative experience with them. And this is where we set up a full Everest experience for journalists towards the end of last year. So we worked with them to just show what NVIDIA's graphics were made of, and how you can really show someone truly that wow moment in VR. But what we did is we did it a full immersive experience for journalists. So we had zero temperature, we had wind in your face, we had journalists sent climbing gear beforehand, and we sent them passports with personalized Nepalese passports with their details on it. And the coverage from it was fantastic. We end up getting things like Digital Trends doing articles saying that climbing in Everest in VR was so terrifying that my knees wobbled, and they gave this emotive, almost documentary-like piece of writing, which sort of really captured the engrossing experience that VR offers. And that's what it's really all about. And from this is where the BBC said in 2016, this is where VR goes from virtual to reality. So that is a fantastic endorsement. So moving on from that, sorry, that is Emma from our office, by the way. I do apologise to her for being on there. What we understand about VR is where we are currently. So, I mean, it does feel like we have been talking about it for a really long time, but we are still in very much the first stages of it. So, unfortunately, even though it's an exciting time to be, I still think there is the slight danger, perhaps, of it becoming a bit of a buzzword or a PR meme, the next, let's just chuck in a pop-up or throw it down the Thames. But hopefully we will see some standout examples that will make people take notice of it as a legitimate medium for marketing and campaigns as opposed to a baddie gimmick. And I think one of the important things on there is to think of it as a medium as opposed to a platform. I mean, I went to BAFTA about a month or so back and went to a talk hosted by Endream, who are making this game called The Assembly, which looks amazing. And they touched on this. But the real message that needs to be get across is that it's not a version or a platform for an existing medium. It is an entirely separate entity with its own disciplines and development and consideration that a new medium deserves. So that's a big challenge for new companies. So, I mean, if you think of video as a medium and ship it across multiple platforms, that's fine. But if you're planning on doing something in VR, make the VR experience, not just a video, or you're going to be left behind. Although, saying this, I'm well aware I've referred to VR as a platform later on in the presentation, so it just goes to show you can slip into that mindset quite easily. But seeing as we've come, quite a long way since the Virtual Boys, I mean, God bless the 90s, I am Nintendo's biggest fan. I do have 2 Nintendo tattoos, one that I did myself, but we all know that wasn't the place to be. But yes, certain limitations still apply. So another event that I went to that talks about the limitations of VR in its current existence was at Bossa Studios, really great company, and there was a talk there by a games company called Us2, and they made Monument Valley, hugely successful iPhone game, and they've got a new VR experience there called Land's End, which I got to try on the Samsung Gear, and it's fantastic. But they talked about the limitations, and that they had a very tough development cycle, and they had to keep reiterating over a number of years. But I think one of the major limitations that people might come across as a stumbling block that they need to overcome is that they think VR and they think, great, all action, I'm going to drop you into a Schwarzenegger film and you're going to be backflipping off an exploding helicopter. But that technology is not quite there yet. And for a user who's not going to be performing these actions physically, not only is it a jarring experience, which negates the entire point of immersion, but also that much movement is going to make you sick. So this is why movement needs to be carefully considered. I mean, we don't want a repeat of some of the news stories that were coming out at CES, for example, where reporters were having to talk of dropping out of their VR experiences and go quietly vomit somewhere in the corner of an expo. So where we see content developers selecting their headset formats, you've got to think about the suitability of the audience. So apps and mobile, you're pretty early go-tos. They're entry level, and I can kind of see the VR app model slightly mirroring the first 2 years of the generic app model, but albeit on a slightly smaller scale. But I mean, if you consider the lower end ones, you've got the majority of Google Cardboard, you're actually holding the headset, CFA, so you've got limited movement, but it's more of a viewing experience. And I mean, I can't believe I'm referring to a 360-degree video as basic, but bear with me, it's just, in comparison to everything else. It's going to be a lot of, a lot of the experiences at the moment on the apps are static imagery, or, ones that they haven't quite thought about putting sound in, doing the full immersion. So it still has potential to wow, absolutely, particularly if you're thinking about that kind of really clever content that people don't want to look away from. But then if you start moving up in the world, you've got the Gear VR, which, you've got headset, you've got straps, great for virtual tours, or experiences that are on rails where you're guided through. And I've seen some fantastic showreels performed in this way, and I think it's a great way to naturally evolve from video. So if you need to turn something around a bit faster in a development plan as opposed to doing something too interactive, it's a great way of doing that. I mean, another good example is on the PlayStation VR. I got to go hands-on with that at EGX Res a couple of weeks back, and I tried an experience on rails, and it saw me ducking and diving away from people throwing objects at my head, and I was a monster that was headbutting buildings, as you do. And it was fantastic. It was a lot of fun, and I didn't have to leave my sofa, which was always nice. So any travel and location experience is fantastic. And I mean, that sort of segues nicely into Oculus, which does a lot of that similar activity too. It's still fairly passive, but you do have the added bonus of the games controller to play and interact while an experience happens around you. So if you required maybe some sort of text or questions or choice or activity within there, you've got more freedom to develop in that. But do bear in mind with that it's plugged in. So as opposed to mobile wireless experience, you want to make sure people don't get carried away or injuring themselves. And then also you're looking at the suitability of the environment. You've got to think about processing power as well, mobile versus PC. PCs, you have to have a certain level of quality within the PC to have it VR ready. So it's an obvious thing, but sometimes I think it's something that people could forget. And I mean, if you're going for this high-powered experience, you've got the HTC Vive, which is hugely optimal for the high-end, realistic, in-depth experiences. So if you've got bigger brands and fantastic content creators like Matt, outside of the gaming sphere, you can do this for large-scale projects. You've got peripherals, you can walk around, and I mean, this is what we use for our Everest experience, in fact. And I was staying late at work the other day, and with all things playing the Office Job Simulator game, and just being able to walk around and having to pick things up and fully explore them. I was plopping my mug in the shredder, and as much as I love my company, it's a shame I can't throw staplers at my colleagues. So being able to do that in a virtual environment is fantastic. That's when I felt really, really immersed, and you do forget the outside world of that, but you do have to balance that with recognizing that there is a fuller development cycle, but you've got space to put the little Easter eggs in and have that interactivity. So if you have the budget and time and creative resources, that is the one. So it is the year of VR, 2016, definitely, but I think we need to think about the best uses of these platforms' potentials. And at the London Games Conference, they talked about this. It's going to be a lot more of a shared experience between brands at the moment and helping each other out, because, you see, this is where I called it a platform. This is where people are going to be sharing how to best use it so that, it continues to have its validity and its worth. So another thing to slight mention on this, with where VR currently is where you're going to go into either using AR, which is what people talk about, augmented reality, where you're overlaying a currency with new objects, or virtual reality where you're constructing the environment, or a lot of people are starting to talk about mixed reality now as well. So where your AR is in a partially constructed environment but also real, and then the fake objects can interact and be immersed. It's incredibly interesting and a lot more intricate, but you're going to start seeing more companies of that. So it's definitely one to watch out for. So where there's an opportunity for PR, best use potential? Yeah. Okay. So where there's an opportunity for PR, I know I touched on the, where the opportunities are earlier, but I think some brands are going to start to get the hang of this later this year. And I think some already have. I mean, the art world has really taken on the virtual tour aspect of PR, and Thomas Cook, even as early as last year, were offering 360-degree tours of their destinations, and v-commerce is already a thing, not as a head over an item to click and purchase. That's a model that's already in use. And although not a brand, the medical industry has already begun working out how to integrate VR into surgery and training. So it's interesting. That moreover, the opportunities are really huge. I know I'm going to hammer this point to death, but there does need to be an emphasis on quality and not quantity. So what you need to ask is, what are your objectives for your campaign? It's like doing any campaign. What medium do I actually need? Would 2D video suffice? Or would experiential activity advice? you know, that also gives people the opportunity to try something they wouldn't normally have access to. But where VR lies is, if you genuinely want to create an immersive experience that is relative to your brand, something that allows behind-the-scenes access, or something that would be unachievable with traveling to a location, because A, of cost, or B, that the location itself does not exist yet. When you want to start thinking about that, that is when you want to start incorporating VR into your plan. So also, if you want to carry out something that has no real cleanup or consequences, then great, go for it. Creative agencies. So the op here is fantastic for new business. I think a lot of time, you know, with PR, when we're trying to sell an idea to an existing client or trying to win new business, a successful proposal can sometimes fall apart, not necessarily because the ideas are bad. I mean, in some cases they are, don't get me wrong, but sometimes it's because what you're saying doesn't necessarily translate. And I know here we're going to get a little buzzword happy, and I know we refer to ourselves as storytellers, but the key to a good storyteller or performance is to show and not tell. And what better way to show and not tell than to bring someone into the environment that you're trying to explain to them? And much like SEO, we're talking about content partners. So we're fully open to start working with a content agency as well. And I think there's going to be a lot of a trend, and there's a gold rush towards these companies. So it's a great time for them. I mean, thinking about the relationship with SEO, it wasn't that long ago that PR and SEO were kind of thought of as separate entities with siloed activity. But then you have things now like Brighton SEO, where people are doing talks on how to integrate SEO from the very start. And before you even start getting into the inception of an idea and how it works, you get your SEO guy in and going, right, okay, how are we going to do this? So smart agencies are going to start thinking about how we're going to get those content people in and how everything fits into one package before they go. So, there we are. Right. So just a few sort of takeaway points really for this. If anyone is looking to build PR into VR into a campaign, so that's an easy mistake to make as well. Really, really take your notes in the games industry. I think throughout the presentation, a lot of my examples have come from there, but you know, they're really making good headway in this area. And I'm actually doing a talk on this subject much later in the year, but learning from the games industry, you'll go to events, go to those tech meetups, because you'll get a much better insight into the development process, and you'll witness some breathtaking creativity. So this will be able to shape your ideas more fully and help you build a VR campaign that is both realistic but also fits with your objectives. So, I mean, one tidbit, for example, is how to balance like freedom of movement with directing the eye. And this is another one that I learned at Ambassador from the Assembly. They talked about an example from a very famous first-person shooter. They spent a load of budget, load of man-hours on this huge set piece where they had a spaceship crashing onto the battlefield. And they, a lot of time spent on this. But when they tested it out and they had game testers playing it and everything, 9 times out of 10 they didn't see it, because it just wasn't where their natural field of vision was and where other action was taking the place. And it just seemed like a complete waste. So, I mean, this is something for brands to think about. Where do you want the eye to go to? How do you give visual, audio, spatial, perhaps even signposted clues to show the audience what you want to see, but at the same time remain authentic and interactive? And then, finally, it's just think about the minute detail. This is when you can really score some tricks. I mean, a lot of the time you have 360 degrees to play with. You can bear witness to things from any angle. You can pick objects up and see what is underneath them. You can use techniques like photogrammetry to completely recreate environments that have, all been photographed, and then put your own stamp on them. So the possibilities for this are huge, and they're really exciting. So from these minute Easter eggs that I've talked about to envisioning an entire world where your brand is king, tiny, carefully thought out details and references will be what makes a good campaign great. So yeah, thanks very much. Back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. You've covered a lot of ground there, but I do have a question before we hand over to Matt for his presentation. You talked right at the start with the NVIDIA example and taking people virtually up Everest in that environment. I'm fascinated, though, if I'm a journalist on the receiving end of an invite to something like that, how do you manage that? How do you manage the expectations? How do you stop me believing that you actually are taking me up Everest, but also build up suspense for the event?
That's a tricky one. It's quite a tough one to answer, but I think you expressed with this whole crate, and we did make sure that it wasn't an invite. We didn't literally say like, here's your plane tickets, let's go. And obviously it also had the directions to the location, which was in Tobacco Dark, which was a big clue that they might be doing something VR. And also NVIDIA was a clue. But at the same time, that level of immersion, just the second they walked in, they had to have these coats on because it was bloody freezing in that room. And, you know, once you actually have the headset on, and this is something that particularly with fine, with their ears on, the headset, the controllers in your hands where you're doing it, and then you're actually walking through real fake snow. You're trudging through snow, and you've got it blowing in your face. It's such a tricky thing to try and talk about unless you really experience it. And then once you do that, that suspension of disbelief.
Actually, again, before I hand over to Matt, it seems to me that one of the things that's coming through your presentation is try these things out, start experiencing them. You're saying go to games events, see how other industries are developing this way, but also I get the idea that you're also saying trial and error, make some content for this, have a look at how these things work.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Honestly, the amount of experiences available are huge now. Some great, some could do with improvement, but you'll only get an idea of how you want to do this successfully if you go and try these things out for yourself.
Great, thank you. Now, just to remind to all of you listening into the webinar, do send in your questions. Let us know what you want to hear from Nick and Matt. Now, Matt, I'm going to hand over to you, and please take your presentation away.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to start very briefly by just explaining how we came to be in the VR world, because I think it gives a little bit of context to what I'm going to say later on. Primarily, we didn't go into virtual reality because we were looking for a new business, because we felt that our agency needed anything else. We actually came to virtual reality purely as consumers. We came as customers. A few months ago, or sorry, a few years ago, we were given Google Cardboard. We tried it. It was fun. The videos we were watching, the content was pretty rubbish by today's standards, but it was fun, and we saw that it was something that could really go somewhere. From there, we moved up to a slightly better headset, and from there we moved up to a better headset, and it's been moving like that ever since. And once you get up to the point where you're on the Oculus platform, there's some really good content on there, and we started to see straight away that there's a lot of potential for virtual reality in itself, but also it's something we can use in the media and use in PR. And so that's when we started to look into finding studio partners and finding the right fit for us. And one thing we've come across as we got here is that there's a lot of doubt, there's a lot of resistance about VR, and it comes from the doubt that people are saying, is this going to be the next mini disc? Is this going to be something that, you know, we all get super excited about now and it disappears? And I think what you really need to look at here is the kind of big players that have a lot of money resting on this. This is an industry that, you know, Samsung, Facebook, Nokia, even Apple potentially, allegedly, are getting involved. And they're spending so much money on this that they want to make it work. They want you to succeed. If you're going to become somebody who uses VR, they want to help you succeed. And so I think you need to look at this as an industry that is here to stay. There's already theme parks, film studios. People are using it all over, and it's already affordable, but it's going to become more affordable. We know that happens with every technology. It starts off as expensive, and before you know it, people can't believe how much you used to pay for these headsets. But when you can already start to get involved in virtual reality for around £10, you know, it's a no-brainer that people are going to take that opportunity to try it out. The more it's talked about, the more people are going to get involved. As New York Times, you know, they saw it as a big enough thing to give away 1.3 million headsets to its subscribers. You know, that shows the belief that they've got in it, and I think that means that as PRs and people in the media industry, we have to follow that, and we have to see that if they're having that sort of belief in it, then we need to start following suit and give them the content that they need. So I'm not going to dwell too long on the figures, but I think this is something that you can take away and have a look at. But there's a lot of billions up there. I think that's the key thing to look at there, is that there are big numbers involved in this industry, and that shows again the sort of the belief and confidence that people in the know have in virtual reality, and I think that means we need to follow. One of the words I'm going to be using probably too much during this whole thing is experience, because in our opinion, experience is at the center of absolutely everything that virtual reality is. You know, we can watch videos, we can listen to podcasts, play games, but we only ever experience virtual reality. And we need to see that people are they're more invested when we allow them to define the experience themselves. We're not telling them what the experience is. We're not putting a director down to say, look at this, look this way, look that way. We're allowing them to find the experience themselves. And it means that they shape their own experience and they shape the way that they view it, and they then give it to their friend who views it in a completely different way and sees a completely different video. And then they talk about it, and then they watch it again to see what their friend saw and what another friend saw. So you'll get people going back to the same content again and again, because every time we can make it a different experience. It's also worth remembering as well that when you're in virtual reality, when you've got a headset on, you're isolated from the outside world. Now, as people in PR or marketing or whatever it is we do, we put an advert on the TV and people ignore it. They go to make a cup of coffee. They talk to their friends. You put an advert in a magazine, people, they might see the logo, but they flick past it. When you've got somebody in virtual reality, they're completely isolated and they're only looking at whatever it is you're putting in front of them. And that's a massive thing for PR to be able to use. So as a PR tool, one of the things that we encourage people to think about is that you're creating a world completely free of outside influence. That means that we can decide exactly what happens to you, but let you think that you're deciding what happens. And that's the key to it all. We've been moving in PR towards experiential stunts, flash mobs, all of these things that became little PR buzzwords that everybody wanted to do a flash mob for a while, didn't they? And that's because people want to get involved, because we want our customers to get more and more involved in our PR stunts. We don't want them just to look at them anymore. We want them to feel like they're a part of them. What this allows us to do is we can let people experience it, not just watch it. But we don't have to worry about any external problems. So we're not going to have to worry about health and safety. We don't have to worry about people not turning up. We don't have to worry about the council coming and telling us we're not allowed to film here. So all of these things get taken out. We let you experience it, but without all the other problems that come into putting on stunts and flash mobs and whatever it is that we're doing as an experiential idea. Content is key on all of this. There really isn't enough content out there. So as a PR who's creating something, you know that there are people who are going to download everything you're putting out there just because they want to watch it. It doesn't matter if they're interested in football. You put a football video out, people will download it and have a look. If you put an advert for a soft drink out, people will download it and have a look. There's not really been a time recently that I can think of where people have just been desperate to download your adverts. And that's an incredible thing that we can use. If you can be an early adopter now, you can create that community and make people think of you as the VR company. And so you get them invested in your product and your brand. Other people will share your message for you. There's so many people now that are buying headsets. I've done it. I bought a headset, and now everybody that comes around my house, they have a couple of drinks and they want to try my headset. That means that I'm sharing content to everybody else. I'm buying it and then I'm showing it to 10, 20, 30 people. If you can get other people to share everything you're doing, that's an incredible thing. We also got the feel-good factor, which is brilliant in PR. For instance, recently the Multiple Sclerosis Society, they created some content where they helped people who suffered from the disease. There was a surfer and a dancer, and they made them surf and dance again using virtual reality. That kind of feel-good factor is absolutely huge in PR, and you get to experience it in a much better way by watching it through these headsets. It's also a great educational tool. Oh, yeah, here we are. It's also a good educational tool, and I know educational sounds quite tedious and boring, but I think it can be very important when we're trying to put our products in front of people. They're going to find their own way to our products. It's more fluid than an advert, and it lets them feel like they've discovered it. And we can put people in a situation where they can understand your products or your client's ethos. For instance, there was a great thing recently where Excedrin, I don't know if I'm saying that right, a painkiller company, created some content where you could put the headset on and see what it's like to suffer from a migraine. Now, I suffer from migraines, and I get so fed up with people saying, oh, it's just a bad headache, isn't it? And there's no way of telling them how bad it is. You can't show them, you can't let them inside your head. So it's a great way of showing people it's not just like a headache, this is what a migraine's like. It builds awareness, but it also puts that product right in front of you as you're learning. Obviously, as Nick mentioned earlier, storytelling is at the centre of everything we do in the media, and it's the biggest thing in PR. We're all here to tell stories. What this does, what VR does, is it adds a new dimension to your storytelling. There's more context. So when you're watching, whether it's a news report or something like that, if you're watching a news report from a war zone, All we do at the moment is we look directly into the eyes of the newsreader, and he tells you there's bombs everywhere, it's terrible around here, and all we're doing is looking at an English guy telling us how bad it is. Using virtual reality, we can listen to him, he can be stood in front of us, and if we want to look straight at him, but we can also turn around, you can look at what's around you. When he describes that the whole village has been torn apart, you can turn around and see the village. It gives a whole new context to everything that's being reported on, and it does that with every story you're going to tell through virtual reality. Because again, our gaze isn't directed by other people. We choose where we look, we choose what we concentrate on. USA Today has also announced that they're doing the first VR regular news show called Virtually There, which means they're going to be able to do that with every news report of the day. They're going to be able to take it down there, take VR cameras down there, and show you exactly what's going on. And if you think dropping yourself into the middle of the riots in Brixton, or into the middle of the village where Ebola broke out, there are places we could take you through virtual reality that we could never ever normally take you. And it gives a whole new, much more trust to the news as well, because we're actually being able to see everything. We know we're not being dictated to, and we know we're not having a special view that's been decided by somebody else. So we take you to places that you can't already travel, as we just described. Disability, age, finances, health and safety, accessibility, they're all things that get in the way of your PR campaigns. When you're trying to put something on, invariably we do it in London, we put an event on in London, we do a stunt in London, which means that everybody else outside of London can't experience it. Now they can. We can invite everybody in the world to your event at one time. So you can put on events for millions of people, you can put on shows, gigs where you sell tickets to literally everybody in the world if you want. There's no limit to the amount of people who can get involved. If you're trying to do dangerous stunts and experiences, we can all experience them with you. If you're Red Bull throwing somebody out of to do a parachute jump out of space, why can't we experience it as him? No more just looking at a GoPro camera and watching him fall. We can actually look through his eyes and see what it's like to fall that way. We could also bridge the gap between the announcements of projects and people being able to visit them. We've had it a lot. We look after restaurants, bars, new buildings, and when we're trying to talk to journalists about it and we're trying to tell them, oh, it's going to be great, and they say, cool, have you got any pictures? And we say, no, it's just not been built yet. This is a way that we can take people around and we can walk you through things, whether it's the Olympic Park, whether it's a new football stadium, Spurs' new football stadium, the Olympic Parks, now it's changed into West Ham Stadium, all of this stuff, we can actually walk you through, we can sit you in a seat and we can show you what it's like. We can travel back or forward in time to events. We can show you what happened on this spot millions of years ago. And that leads on to VR as a revenue stream, because ultimately the other thing holding us back is that virtual reality costs a lot of money to make. You're probably looking at around about £30,000 to start to make a good quality virtual reality video, and you're trying to sell that into a client. The great thing about virtual reality is that you can make money back off it. You can sell the products, you can sell your content on Oculus, so anywhere from 99p upwards really. There's games on there for £15, perhaps even more. You don't need to make a whole load of sales to make your money back. But we can also turn the content itself into a shop. So when you've got a headset on, if you're looking around the room that you're sitting in, you can stare at a chair and it will tell you how much it is and take you straight through to buy it. You can look at the furniture, anything else around the room you can buy. So it's becoming a website, an e-commerce store, an app, and an experience all in one go. There's also customizable Google Cardboard headsets. They're cheap, easy to produce, and they come flat packed. A brilliant use of this recently was Time Loop, which is a time travel app or time travel content. And the way it works was that you could use headsets to look at events of the past all around London. But the key was that you had to be there to see it. So you went to the Tower of London, you unlocked it, and then you got to see a reenactment of what happened at the Tower of London. And that enabled them to sell Google Cardboard headsets at museums, shops, all branded with their logos on. So they're making money out of it, as well as producing content and giving people a better insight into what happened here and giving them a view of the past in London. So the most important bit, I guess, is advice on how to create your own virtual reality. First of all, it's probably easy to say that there is no right or wrong answer to this at the moment. There's things we'd maybe advise you not to do, there's things that we'd advise you to do, but we're all still discovering how it's meant to work and what works best. I'd say the first thing is never treat virtual reality as an afterthought. It's something that takes a long time to create, and you can build it into a campaign really, really easily, but you need to think of it right at the beginning, and you need to plan for that. The second thing is try it, and try it again, because there's so many people in virtual reality that have never seen virtual reality. They try it, they say, oh, I've pitched it to my client, I've had this great idea, but they've never actually sat down and put a headset on. The only way you can work out what works and what doesn't work is using a headset. So download everything you can, watch it, and watch it again, and work out. There's some things that you'll love and some things you'll hate. And you need to take that into your client and describe to them why this is the way we should be doing things. You need to learn the language of VR, and that's quite important. Nick touched on it earlier. When you've got a headset on and you're sitting down, if your head then starts to move and you're running around the room but your feet aren't moving, it's really, really uncomfortable. And that's what makes people feel sick. So you need to think about making everything move around you. Things come to you, things happen, or perhaps you're sitting in a car that gives you the movement, feeling weird and you're feeling like your legs aren't moving. So instead of doing an interview with somebody in a chair, do it on the front of a boat going through the city, do it on a train, because that way there's things to look at, there's constantly moving content all around you, and you don't feel strange, the fact that you're moving. I think the other key thing, going back to experience, is whenever you're creating content, always put the experience of the customer first. There's a lot of videos when you go onto Oculus or whatever and download this content. So much of it is people showing off about what you can do in virtual reality. You don't need explosions in everything you do. You don't need people smashing through windows and jumping up behind you. It's not important. Some of the best videos, there's a great one, if you were to download it, that features LeBron. And it's a straight documentary. There's nothing fancy in it. You just go around with LeBron for the day, and he talks to you, and you watch him play basketball. It's super simple, but it's brilliant for that reason. So think to yourself, when you're doing this stuff, am I PRing virtual reality, or am I PRing my client? Because there's no need to show off, really, because after a while, it all gets a bit samey. It's like when we start putting too many special effects in movies. After a while, you don't notice them anymore. It's just boring. I'd also always say that creating a standalone experience is important. If you take everything away from that's your brand logo or anything like that, the messages away, is it still fun? And that's the way to get people to download your content. If it's something that you want to go back to again, then you create a good virtual reality experience. If it's something you watch and it feels like an advert, you're not going to go back to it again, and you're not going to show your friends. Always try and find a way to creatively build in links and e-commerce, because ultimately, if you can tell your client that you're going to make money out of an advert, he's going to be very happy to do that. Also, add it to an existing campaign is a really good idea. So if you're making an advert for TV, why not have a behind-the-scenes footage that you can watch in virtual reality? It was done by Samsung recently for the School of Rugby, with Jack Whitehall, where you've seen all the adverts, you've seen what's going on, but you can put the headset on and be there, and it's all happening around you. Sports Illustrated recently did a cover where you could go and watch their cover shoot with the models. So there's always that if you're already doing something, you've already got the talent there, why not think about putting that virtual reality experience into it as well? Another thing Nick touched on earlier is combining virtual reality in the real world. So, having the snow coming at you, having all these things, the smells and the other things around it to make it a much more four-dimensional experience. So you can put it onto a theme park ride, as we've seen. There's roller coasters with virtual reality included in them. There's loads of ways that you can use it, but try and think outside of just having those headsets on and think of other things you can do. And most of all, just think how you can engage users that aren't already virtual reality fans, because we understand that not everybody has a headset, not everybody knows what it is, and not everybody understands it. So if you can find a way either to put those headsets on people or to create something else around it, perhaps it's just a 360 video that goes onto YouTube, but something else that can drag people in and make sure that it's usable by everybody so that your money's not all spent just on those people with headsets. I was going to finish up actually with a quote from somebody else because they say it a lot better than I do. This is from Kelly Vaught, I hope I'm saying his name right, who works in an experiential agency in America. And he said, I don't know if you or I could identify what our last tweet or post was or the billboard we saw on the way to work, but I do remember my first concert when I got my driver's license and kissed my wife goodbye this morning. When we experience something, it's embedded in us in a way that's fundamentally different than reading or looking at something passively. And I think that is the key to everything that VR does and what it is.
Great. Thank you, Matt. We're going to switch to your questions in a minute and the questions that you've been sending in for Matt and Nick, so do please continue to send those in. We've got about 10 minutes, 15 minutes for those questions. Matt, before we go on to that, though, you talked so much about experience. What was your sort of eureka moment or the experience that really turned you on to VR and its possibilities?
For me, I think it was definitely when I got the Samsung Gear VR, because I think the content on there is very different. It's a much better quality. It's much more realistic. I think up until then, I perhaps thought it was more of an entertainment thing. The stuff I'd seen on cardboard was a lot of it was animated. It was fun, but it was kind of useless but fun. And I think once I saw some of the content, especially the Bron video, that sort of showed me you can make documentaries on it, and you can use it in a much more serious way. And I think that for me was when I realised for the media, it's not just a fun thing people put on at a party. It can actually be used in really clever ways and serious ways as well.
Yes, great. Now, I can see a lot of questions coming in from people on the webinar. Nick, I'm going to come to you first. And you both, Matt and Nick, mentioned storytelling a lot, and clearly this is something that makes a lot of sense in this environment. But we've got a great question here. Nick, I'm gonna put it to you. Do you think the traditional sequential form of storytelling will be overtaken by a non-traditional form of narrative that portrays emotion over story? Should brands take advantage of this? So do you think that that form of emotion over story is going to be prioritized, and are brands in a position to take advantage?
I think it will for a while, just while people get to grips with the new medium, certainly. While people are trying VR, I think emotion, and as Matt said, experience, I'm taking that word away, I definitely experience. It is non-traditional, and I think we will see a huge surge in it, but I do still believe that, traditional sequential storytelling will still have its place. I just think we're going to enter quite an exciting experimental phase, and I think this is what, brands should definitely take advantage of that, because you're going to see some really fantastic iterations of this, and then these are things that you could then perhaps blend into more traditional PR campaigns later on. So I don't see them almost as two separate entities. I see this as what's exciting now and will certainly trend now, and then clever people will find a good way to combine the two.
Again, you both talked about costs, and you talked particularly about costs in terms of consumers getting involved in this. But Matt, I'd like to ask you, because you mentioned a figure for sort of costs as people start to get involved, and the question here, we've got a question about how much would a typical VR-led campaign cost to execute? For example, and this is, I know, is Nick's example, Discover Everest. So Matt, what are you sort of thinking in terms of ballpark costs? I know you said a figure. I was hoping you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that probably at the moment you're looking at around £30,000 to create a short, and by short I mean sort of maybe 2 to 3 minutes video. I mean, as with any of these things, it can skyrocket from there as soon as you add in longer videos, the number of people, whether you have actors in this, how you're filming it, any kind of animation, special effects. It can go up to hundreds of thousands. I wouldn't like to guess whatever it costs, but yeah. I don't think that was £30,000. But I would say that you could potentially do it slightly cheaper than that. But I think if you're looking for a really good quality, usable piece of content, I'd say that's probably a good ballpark to start with.
And Nick, I won't put you on the spot by asking you exactly what Everest costs, but what I'm interested in is also, what are the things that people might not be anticipating? Are there any sort of hidden costs or things that you might be saying, look, plan this into your budget?
That's an interesting one. I think, the content creation itself, because you look at what goes into video, but then you also, going back to what I was saying before, like with the gaming stuff, there's much more of a development process if you're including something interactive. So, there's a lot more programming that goes in, a lot more coding. There's, those things, because I think we tend to look at things at quite a consumer angle and go, great, here's some content, we'll get some people to do some content, we'll PR it, we'll get it out there. But then actually when you start thinking, all right, there's development costs, there's script writing, there's storyboarding, all those things that come with video, and then the extra things of testing, how it's going to interact. So, I think that's probably the costs that people need to remember and factor in, and also in terms of time as well when they're looking to create something.
I can see that we've obviously got a really diverse audience on this webinar, and that is brilliant, because we're hearing so much. You both used examples of travel brands. And again, Nick, I'll come to you first on this, and I'll come to you, Matt. But we've got a question here which says VR lends itself quite naturally to gaming, sports, and entertainment brands by its nature.
Yeah.
Have you seen any good examples of consumer or retail brands using VR?
Yes, I have. with the consumer one, Thomas Cook, for example, was one I mentioned earlier. Also, I mean, bit of an interesting consumer one. Coachella did a really interesting thing with their festival. You know, they sent all out their users all the VR headsets, and they got to experience what it's like before they went to Coachella, which is great. I mean, you know, that's going to build up demand for people either by buying tickets or lining up to get into it in the future, because the second someone gets their ticket, it's like, you know, Matt said with people coming around his house and he's going, right, cool, come try my thing. You know, someone's going to go, right, I've got my Coachella ticket. Right, do you want to come and see where I'm going? And make people jealous. And you build out that desirability. That's a great consumer example.
Excellent. And Matt, your presentation was also full of examples, but what about yourself? Whether it's your favourite or something that really sticks out in terms of a consumer or retail brand using VR?
Well, I actually quite like the sort of the way that brands are using sort of around the content itself. I saw a thing recently where Coca-Cola had released a way that you could turn their boxes of cans into a cardboard headset. I think that sort of thing's really interesting. When people are kind of, they've overcome a problem there, and the problem is that at the moment people don't have a way to view the content. So yeah, you can send them out to everybody, or you can find a really creative way to let people view it for themselves. I think that sort of thing's really exciting. I think that was a really cool campaign.
Okay. Now, I've got a question which I'm going to ask you both, but I'm not going to ask for the answer straight away. I want you to think about this, because this is a really interesting question, and I have to say I'm so pleased that Anna has sent this in. It says, which brands would Nick / Matt like to see enter the VR space that haven't yet? So I want you both to pick a favourite brand and maybe suggest how they might enter this space. So we'll come back to that question in a minute. And also, I want to thank everyone. There's so many about costs here. I'm hoping we've covered those cost and budget questions with our answers. And also, the request for stats. We will share the slides with you after this presentation, so you will be able to get all those slides and all that, those billions of stats that are being presented there, so we'll make sure you see them. Now, I think it's a relatively straightforward question, so I'll go to you, Matt, with this, because you talked about buying headsets and so on. The question is, if you bought a VR headset, where can you currently download content to experience? Okay,
well, there's two ways, basically. I mean, if you were just to go onto your smartphone and type in virtual reality, or there will be stuff that can come up that you download directly onto your phone. That kind of stuff is good for Google Cardboard and things like that. When you move up into headsets like Samsung Gear, that works on the Oculus platform. Now, for those who don't know, the Oculus platform it's an app that you download to your phone again, but it's a little bit like, I sort of describe it as being the iTunes for virtual reality. You go on there, there's a library of things, each with a price. You click on it, you download. Some of it's free, a lot of it's free actually, and you download it straight to your phone. Then the next time you put on your headset, the home screen you come to, it has all of the videos you downloaded in a library, so you can just look at it, push the button on the side, and it starts playing. So there's different ways, but I think Oculus, and the reason that I kind of say to people like the Samsung Gear is my favourite of the sort of mid-level headsets, because it's great quality and because it works on the Oculus headset, and there's a lot of really good content on there.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, I'm delighted to see this question also, because as you know, at Gorkana, we're very big on the effectiveness of PR, and obviously about measurement, and we've got the AMIC Summit on our minds in June as well. So I'm delighted to see this question, and Nick, I'm going to come to you with this one. How can you measure the effectiveness of VR, and what are some example sort of KPIs?
This is going to be an interesting one, because obviously it's still in its infancy, but there is, I think, an interesting way to do it, and this is something that we do with crowdfunding analytics. For example, we get the back-end access to a lot of our clients' Kickstarters, so we can see levels of engagement. And one of the key things you see on there is with video and how quickly the drop-off is in terms of how long it takes. The quickest way to do it is to be measuring how long people actually stay in your experience for, because that is the quickest way to measure length of engagement. I think that's probably one of the key ones there. And then obviously we'll get metrics on downloads as well. So you've got those two as a base to start off, but I think this is something that PR companies are going to have to think quite a lot about. And
I think he's spot on there, because actually I think at this level, at this stage in virtual reality, I think there are a lot of people downloading everything they can, like I mentioned earlier. So I think although downloads is obviously it will be a good measurement, if I'm honest, there's probably 20 videos that I've downloaded onto my headset that I haven't watched yet, because I just went on and got everything. So So I think, you know, if you can go in and have a look at whether I've actually watched it and for how long, then I think that's definitely at the beginning anyway. That's definitely a better way to look at it.
Yeah. Okay. Now there's a question here, and I think I'll start with you on this, Matt. Is have you seen VR showrooms yet? You know, you touch the product and receive a price.
No, I'm sure they're out there. You know, I'm not the authority on what is out there, but I have no doubt that it will be out there because, you know, it's so easy to look around to look at something using a headset and straight in front of your eyes the prices pops up and take you straight through to buy it. I mean, if it's not already there, you might have seen it. I don't know, but if it's not already there, then I'm sure it will be very soon.
Yeah.
Okay, and again, so we've got really diverse audience for this webinar, which is brilliant. We've had so many examples, but again, Matt, I'm going to put you on the spot with this one first. The financial services industry. So this is the question: what applications of VR do you see for financial services industry?
Crikey, I don't work in the financial services industry, so you massively put me on the spot. I mean, I'd have to look at what it is that the client is looking to achieve, really. I mean, that's the key thing. Is I think the more we've looked into this, it doesn't seem to matter what the client is or how seemingly boring or whatever. There is always a way to use virtual reality, and I would have to look into the specific clients for it, but it's definitely usable.
Exactly. I mean, although I much like yourself, I am very much a consumer kid, but yeah, financial. You've got training. Training is such a huge thing. So financially, you've got interaction with people, you've got, you know, training people how to deal with clients, how to do things. What better way to do it than in a virtual environment where you can test these things?
I think it's also worth pointing out that, that neither of us really mentioned earlier, that a lot of people at the beginning thought that one of the problems with virtual reality is that you're on your own in a headset. It's the most antisocial thing in the world, you know, and that picture came out of Zuckerberg walking into a room. It looked like the future with everyone in their headsets ignoring each other. And I think that's a bit negative because actually what people don't realise is it's a phone that you've got in the front of your headset. You can talk to people. It's, you know, there are already applications where you can, it's effectively Skype, but I can look at you, and when I'm talking to you, I can see you nodding, I can see your hand, your movements, and it's, you know, it's probably not going to take over from Skype, but there are sociable and social ways you can use it as well. So you can connect with people all around the world in your company and use these headsets for that as well.
Here's a question for you both. Have you started working with estate agents? So I think this goes on to what you've been talking about, venues and so on. So Nick, have you started working with estate agents? And actually, there's a wider question about how this might work for property businesses, I guess.
I mean, there's loads of ops for property businesses, of course. I mean, it's like Matt was saying earlier. It's like, okay, this area might not be built yet, but I can take you on a tour. And it just reminds me of, you know, that apprentice at last year's Apprentice when they were showing people around the showroom, and they cocked it up hugely because they were going, right, this is the cupboard, and someone's like, no, that's the front door, mate. If you had that in VR, you wouldn't make those mistakes, and people can visualize it, and they'd see their home. So, I mean, although we're not working on one,
I've seen something. I'm trying to think who it was that did it, but it was kind of a huge house, you know, a really special big house, and they'd done it. And you could actually, you got to each door, and you could just click on it to go through. You look at the door, click on it to go through. So it was mostly using pictures as opposed to the full video, but it did allow you to get a feel for the space because you knew what was where, rather than having just a picture of the bathroom. You can see the bathroom is off the kitchen, and that might be a problem. You know, there's that kind of. But I mean, I think the only thing for that is at the moment is whether it's cost effective to put virtual reality at the moment into an estate agent's work. You know, whether they're having to do so many properties a day, but that will come down.
Yeah. We've got questions about pharma companies, but I think Matt, certainly you gave some examples of how pharma companies are using VR already and some of the ways that can happen. Nick, can I ask you about packaging? So here's a question. How do you imagine the role of packaging evolving in VR?
Packaging of headsets or packaging of an experience? I mean,
how you want to answer that, I think.
Okay. I mean,
explain.
I feel like I touched on packaging of experience when you're doing things, you know, just a fully massive 4D touch, feel, all the senses. Packaging is huge. I mean, there's loads of companies now that are doing customizable headsets. That was in Matt's presentation. At Dynamo, we've got our own custom Dynamo headsets. So, I mean, and McDonald's did great ones of those things. I mean, interesting that your headset probably smell like fries, but great. Yeah, I mean, you can make it look at, you can give someone, I mean, it's a great clue to give an idea of what's inside the headset is what's on the outside. It's the same with any packaging. I think, you know, give a clue as to what the experience is going to be.
Yeah. Okay. Here's a macro question, and I must say I think this is probably the last question we have time to answer before I ask our expert duo about the brands they want to see on VR. And this question, Matt, I'll come to you on this one. And ultimately, is VR limited by the UK's poor internet infrastructure?
I don't think so, no, because for a start, an awful lot of the stuff that you'll be using at the beginning, you download to your phone. So, no, as long as you can get some internet somewhere at some point, you can download all the content onto your phone and then watch it whenever you want, wherever you want. Now, obviously, in the future, with when we're starting to hook up to computers and things like that, it might become a problem, but I don't think so, because ultimately, if you can download it to a phone, then you can watch it whenever you want.
Great. Okay, thank you. So, Nick, do you want to tell us which brand you want to see on VR?
Okay, I mean, before I do, I'm going to make a personal plea to Nintendo to come back to the VR space because we do miss you. But touching on what we were earlier with this, with the looking at places, property market, I would really love, from personal experience and looking at 35 places to rent in London and having sort of several aneurysms over it, if Spare Room could do VR, please. But also Citymapper and Google Maps, because, you know, sometimes when either I'm useless at reading maps and getting directions, if someone could just combine that street map or that city map with, right, I'm going on this tube, oh yeah, it looks like this one, and then not, you know, misreading signs and knowing where I was going, or at least knowing that, you know, I'm not going to end up in some alley or something, that would be fantastic.
Excellent. On that note, Matt, what's and you will have the final say on all this. Which brand do you want to see on VR?
For me, a particular brand, I would like to see more sport come into it. I think the two sort of performance spaces, sport and music, I think they're just huge markets. I mean, we always give the example when we're talking to people like this. When you think of Adele recently playing the O2, and to a certain extent now Muse as well, they sold out 5 nights at the O2 at £50 a ticket. They're making great money, but they can only do 5 nights at the O2. They can't stay there forever. The idea that they could now sell tickets for £1, virtual reality tickets for £1. They could sell 1 million tickets for their show. The same with football clubs. You know, obviously with Sky Sports and things, that's an issue. But certainly behind the scenes, these clubs we all want to have a look at what's going on behind the scenes at Man United and Leicester. I mean, let's put a camera in Leicester's dressing room after they win the Premier League. When they win the Premier League.
I was about to say, that's a prediction there. That's a prediction there.
But, you know, that sort of thing, that kind of behind-the-scenes footage, that one-off stuff that people will still be looking back at in 20 years' time, because it's that one moment that no one else can get a look into. That's what I like to see, more in sport and music, definitely.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I'm afraid the worst part of my job is that I've always got to cut things short, but I'm very conscious of time. And I'm also very conscious, though, that you've sent in some brilliant questions. We've only been able to answer the tip of the iceberg, but thank you so much for sending in those questions. And I'm sure Nick and Matt will be very happy for you to get in touch if you have any more about virtual reality. And that, of course, is Nick Morey from Dynamo PR and Matt Glass from The Cult and the Cultural Reality Co. And before I finish this webinar, I do want to make sure that I express our appreciation so much for Nick and Matt and their time, their effort and preparation for this presentation, and for really bringing the subject of VR to life in a way that I think you can only tell that there's so much to be tapped into in terms of content, creativity, and opportunity there for PRs and for media. I'm afraid that that's all we've got time for, but do look out for our next series of webinars. We're going to be focusing on measurement in PR as we're in the run-up to the Amex Summit in June. So do look out for those webinars as they come up. And again, I want to thank you all for listening in, and particularly for taking part and sending us your brilliant questions. Thank you so much. The webinar is now